All right, so today let's take a deep dive into something pretty fascinating.
Okay.
You often hear that religion is like a conservative force,
Right.
keeps things the way they are.
Yeah.
But what about those times when religion actually sparks revolution?
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. We tend to associate religion with, tradition and
Right.
stability. But history shows us a much more complex picture.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to use liberation theology as a case study
Okay.
to see how religion can be this powerful catalyst for social change.
Okay.
We'll also explore some other movements like Pentecostalism and millenarianism
Right.
for comparison.
Liberation theology is a really interesting example
Yeah,
when you consider the context we're talking about. 1960s Latin America,
right.
widespread poverty, brutal dictatorships,
Mm,
and the Catholic Church,
yeah.
largely seen as aligned with the existing power structures.
Indeed, the church was often perceived as upholding the status quo.
Right.
But then something extraordinary happened.
Right.
A group of Catholic priests, deeply moved by the gospel's message of social justice,
Yeah.
became very vocal advocates for the poor and oppressed.
Hmm.
They went beyond traditional pastoral roles,
Okay.
actively resisting state terror and putting themselves at great risk.
It's incredible to think that these priests were forming what were called base communities,
Yeah.
supporting worker and peasant uprisings,
Hmm.
and even running literacy programs.
Yeah,
It seems like a dramatic departure from the church's typical role.
absolutely. These priests were not just offering spiritual comfort,
Right.
they were actively working to empower the marginalized
Right.
and challenge the systems that perpetuated their oppression.
Yeah.
Their commitment to social justice had a tangible impact,
Yeah.
contributing to the eventual transition to democracy in many Latin American countries.
Wow.
Scholar Jose Casanova has done some fascinating work highlighting this connection.
So even though the church later took a more conservative stance,
Right.
trying to rein in liberation theology, its influence continued.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to another fascinating layer, the Marxist perspective.
Right.
Didn't Marx himself famously call religion the opiate of the masses?
He did.
It seems like liberation theology really challenged that idea.
It did. Thinkers like Maduro and Lowy saw liberation theology as pushing back against the traditional Marxist view of religion as purely a tool of oppression.
Okay.
But even within Marxist thought, there's a debate about how much real, lasting social change liberation theology ultimately achieved.
Ah, I see where this is getting interesting.
Yeah.
Is it possible that it shifted power dynamics within the existing system without fundamentally altering it?
Hmm.
Or did it truly pave the way for a more just society?
That's a question that scholars continue to grapple with.
Right.
Maduro, for instance, argued that liberation theology represented a genuine break with traditional religious structures
Right.
and had the potential to be a truly revolutionary force.
Right.
He pointed to its focus on praxis,
Traxis.
the idea that faith must be lived out through concrete actions aimed at transforming the world.
So Maduro seems to be saying that liberation theology wasn't just about shifting power.
Right.
It was about fundamentally changing the way people related to power.
Exactly. Lowy, while recognizing the movement's power and impact,
Yeah.
was a bit more cautious.
Okay.
He argued that while liberation theology challenged traditional hierarchies within the church and society,
Hmm.
it didn't necessarily lead to the complete overthrow of those hierarchies.
Okay.
He questioned whether it could truly transcend the limitations of the existing system.
So we have these two nuanced perspectives.
Yeah.
Maduro emphasizing the potential for radical transformation,
Mm-hmm.
and Lowy raising questions about the limits of change within existing power structures.
Right.
It makes you wonder how these different interpretations of liberation theology's impact play out in today's world.
It's a great point, and it's a question that leads us nicely into our next example.
Okay.
Pentecostalism.
Okay.
This was another religious movement gaining momentum in Latin America,
Right.
also among the poor, but with a very different approach compared to liberation theology.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about how both liberation theology and Pentecostalism kind of emerged
Yeah.
in the same context of like poverty and inequality,
Right.
but they offered contrasting paths for the poor.
Yeah. That's a key observation. While liberation theology encouraged collective action
Mm-hmm.
and systemic change, Pentecostalism focused more on individual transformation
Well,
and spiritual uplift.
I remember reading this really insightful comparison by the scholar David Lehman.
Okay.
He characterized liberation theology as the domain of revolutionary priests in jeans,
Yeah.
while Pentecostalism was represented by pastors in suits.
Right.
What a vivid way to capture the difference in approach.
Lehman's imagery highlights the contrast beautifully.
Yeah.
It raises some intriguing questions about the effectiveness of these different approaches to social change.
Right.
Does collective action or individual transformation lead to more meaningful and lasting improvements in people's lives?
It's a complex question, and it makes me think about the diverse ways religion intersects with issues of poverty and inequality.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, let's shift gears and explore another fascinating facet of religion's relationship with social change.
Okay.
Millenarian movements.
Right.
These movements, with their belief in a divinely driven transformation of the world, seem to embody the idea of radical change.
Yeah, what's captivating about millenarian movements is how they tap into this deep-seated human yearning
Yeah.
for a world free from suffering and injustice.
Mm-hmm.
They emerge from this sense that the current order is like irrevocably broken
Yeah.
and requires a complete reset, a divine intervention of sorts.
It's like that feeling when you just want to scrap everything and start over,
Yeah.
but on a global scale.
Exactly.
Do you have a particular example of a millenarian movement that stands out?
A classic example is the cargo cults that emerged in Melanesia
Okay.
during the period of European colonization.
Okay.
Peter Worsley's research on these movements offers some compelling insights.
I've heard the term cargo cults before,
Right.
but I'd love to hear more about what made them so unique.
So imagine the arrival of European colonists in Melanesia,
Okay.
bringing with them this abundance of material goods,
Yeah.
things that the islanders had never even encountered before.
Okay.
They called these goods cargo.
Cargo. Okay, so it seems inevitable that the islanders,
Yeah.
observing this influx of cargo being diverted to the colonists,
Mm-hmm.
would question this unequal distribution of resources.
Exactly. This stark disparity fueled this sense of profound injustice,
Okay.
leading to the emergence of various millenarian movements.
Uh-huh.
The islanders believed that this unfair system was destined to be overturned by divine intervention,
Okay.
and the cargo would be redistributed to its rightful owners.
So these cargo cults were about more than just material possessions.
Right.
They were expressing this fundamental challenge to the colonial power structure
Yes.
and the economic inequalities it imposed.
Precisely what's remarkable is how these movements, originating from religious beliefs,
Right.
foreshadowed more overt forms of political action
Uh-huh.
and anti-colonial resistance.
Wow.
Worsley even drew parallels between cargo cults and Engels' concept of proletarian self-consciousness.
Proletarian self-consciousness.
That moment when an exploited group becomes aware of its oppression
Okay.
and unites to challenge the system.
That's a fascinating connection.
Yeah.
It highlights how even seemingly unconventional religious movements can have real-world political implications and contribute to broader social transformations.
It certainly does, and this brings us to the work of another influential thinker,
Okay.
Antonio Gramsci,
Okay.
whose concept of hegemony
Teacher.
helps us understand how religion can function as both a tool of control and a source of resistance.
I'm familiar with the term hegemony,
Right.
but I'd appreciate like a quick refresher on how Gramsci used it.
Sure, Gramsci argued that the ruling class maintains power,
Okay.
not just through like economic and political control,
Right.
but also by shaping the dominant ideas in society, the common sense that most people accept without question.
It sounds like a subtle but powerful form of control.
It is.
Could you elaborate on how religion fits into this framework?
So Gramsci recognized that religion often plays a significant role in reinforcing the status quo.
Right.
It can be used to make social inequalities seem natural, inevitable, or even divinely ordained.
Yeah.
However, he also saw the potential for religion to challenge those dominant ideas.
Okay.
He believed that within the clergy, there could emerge organic intellectuals
Organic intellectual.
who would use their religious authority to empower the oppressed and advocate for change.
It sounds similar to the role those priests played in the liberation theology movement,
Yeah.
acting as organic intellectuals
Right.
to challenge the prevailing power structures. So it seems like Gramsci saw this dual nature to religion, its ability to both uphold and challenge existing power structures.
Right.
Would you say that these organic intellectuals he described were more like exceptions to the rule? Or did he believe they represented a real potential for religion to drive social change?
Gramsci believed that the potential for religion to be a force for change was very real.
Okay.
He saw organic intellectuals as emerging from within oppressed groups,
Right.
drawing on their shared experiences and religious traditions
Yeah.
to articulate a vision for a more just and equitable world.
Oh, yeah.
He believed that religious ideas and language could be powerful tools for mobilizing people and challenging those in power.
That's a really empowering idea.
Yeah.
It suggests that the seeds of change can be found even within institutions that are often seen as upholding the status quo.
Precisely. And this brings us to a compelling study by Dwight Billings
Okay.
that explores how religion can have very different effects on social activism,
Remote.
even within the same religious tradition and socioeconomic class.
Okay.
He looked at coal miners and textile workers in Kentucky, both predominantly working class and Protestant,
Okay.
but with strikingly different levels of labor militancy.
That's an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive that groups with such similar backgrounds would have such different approaches to labor activism.
Right.
What did Billings find?
Billings discovered that religion played a key role in shaping these contrasting levels of activism. Among the coal miners, religion was a source of solidarity and resistance.
Okay.
Many union leaders were also lay preachers who drew on their religious authority to mobilize the miners.
So for the coal miners, religion wasn't just about personal faith.
Right.
It was intertwined with their struggle for economic justice and workers' rights.
Exactly. Churches became spaces for organizing.
Wow.
Hymns and sermons inspired collective action,
Right.
and shared faith fostered this powerful sense of unity in the face of hardship.
Yeah.
It was a potent example of religion fueling a movement for social change.
And what about the textile workers?
Yeah.
How did religion function differently for them?
Yeah. In contrast to the coal miners, religion among the textile workers tended to reinforce the existing power structure.
Oh.
Church leaders often sided with employers and discouraged labor activism,
Wow.
emphasizing themes of obedience and acceptance of one's lot in life.
So Billings' research shows how the same religion,
Yeah.
in this case Protestantism,
Right.
could be a force for both conformity and rebellion,
Yeah.
depending on how it was interpreted and mobilized within a particular social context.
It's a powerful illustration of the complexity of religion's relationship with social change.
Right.
It's not this monolithic force.
Yeah.
Its impact depends on this web of factors.
Okay.
Leadership interpretation, historical context, and the specific grievances and aspirations of those who embrace it.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the revolutionary priests of liberation theology to the cargo cults of Melanesia,
Yeah.
and even the contrasting roles of religion among Kentucky coal miners and textile workers.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's clear that religion can be this surprisingly powerful force for change, challenging our assumptions about its role in society.
It's been a fascinating exploration. And perhaps the most important takeaway is that we shouldn't make these simplistic generalizations about religion's impact on social and political life.
So to our listeners out there, we challenge you to look beyond the headlines
Yes.
and the often simplistic narratives about religion.
Right.
Take a closer look at the world around you. What examples do you see of religion challenging the status quo,
Yeah.
inspiring movements for justice, or driving social change in unexpected ways?
Perhaps you'll find organic intellectuals emerging in your own communities,
Yeah.
advocating for change and drawing on religious traditions to create a more just and equitable world.
It's really amazing to think about.
The possibilities are truly endless.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is my pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another thought-provoking topic. Until then, keep those minds engaged and stay curious.